My guest today actually has a birthday. It's Andrew Chakhayan from Amsterdam. Hi, Andrew, and happy birthday.
Thank you. Thanks, Andre.
So happy that we met exactly this day. By the way, a few words about who you are. Andrew is the managing partner at Strategic Narrative Consulting in Amsterdam. Also, Andrew is helping Booking.com with public affairs as a senior advisor, which is, I think, amazing. And also, you are a TED speaker, you are Aspen alumni, and that's also what we have in common. And also, I think you're just a great human being who is very good at communications. And I thought of talking to you about how Ukraine is perceived through the lens of Europeans today, and also a bit of your personal stories, and then something on how we as Ukrainians and Ukraine shaping the narrative and how it's counter narrated from the Europe. So these are the topics. Good?
Exciting.
All right.
Thanks for inviting me.
Pleasure. So let's start with the very personal thing. How did you wake up to the news of the war?
Yeah, it's very difficult to recall, and I know since I'm not in Ukraine, my life was not in danger. But like most people, I could not believe that this would happen. Like, to the last minute, no matter what the news were, what the Biden administration was saying, all the intelligence reports, I could not, under any circumstances, imagine a full-on invasion, this massive cross-border movement of troops, the bombs, and all of that. And for me, the biggest what I recall is this sense of helplessness. It's this sense of what can I do and not being able to do anything. It just haunts me even now. Yeah, that's just very difficult to describe when you realize that what's happening is so wrong. It should not be happening. And when you don't know what to do, where to go, how to deal with it, and feeling guilty in a way that since I'm far and away in the safety of my home, and knowing that so many friends in Kiev and elsewhere in Ukraine are facing life and death situation.
How much time did it take for you to recover that sense of helplessness in a way? And yeah, how much time?
I haven't recovered. I struggle to communicate on this, speak to people, because it feels like I have to be able to do something. I have to be able to help. I went to the very first protest in Amsterdam, and I see people, and on one hand they're together, on the other hand no one has anything to say. We're all just blank stares, and the sense of just how do you understand this? How do you think about it? And then there's no words to exchange, and it's very difficult. I've in my life I've not donated to many causes, but I think since the only thing I felt I could really do is donate to the military, to various NGOs that gave me an outlet. At least I felt like I'm doing something to contribute. But to say how long it took to kind of get reconciled with this, it hasn't happened yet.
I agree on that. It hasn't happened for me as well, and I'm not sure it's going to happen soon. It's going to take a while. And the history of war and also recovering after war tells us that psychologically to absorb the trauma and go through it, that will take way more than we expect. Coming to further questions. Oh, you wanted to add? Go ahead.
No, the one phrase, since we're on the podcast, maybe we can quote another podcast, was Timothy Snyder. He was saying that being outside of Ukraine, he would call his friends and he will share all of his worries and concerns. And the people in Kiev will reassure him. And I think, in a sense, that was my experience too, is when I spoke with folks in Ukraine, They were calming me down, not the other way around.
I think that's what I go through in a way, being distant as well. I met the war in Cyprus, and then we moved to Vienna, and it's still feeling very distant in a way. And my friends from the front line, they would say, "Come on, dude, come down. Um, no need to fear, no need to feel the guilt and everything, because we got you here. You just support us with what you can. Do do earn money, pay the taxes in Ukraine, which is important, or at least donate, and we're gonna do what we have to do." But it's so hard to believe that, like to internalize that, honestly. So that's where this whole guilt is coming from. I think it's gonna come for us for a long time.
Right. It's also, you intellectually can process. You say, look, I am where I am. I'm doing what I can, as long as I'm doing my best to help to bring Ukraine to victory, which we know is coming. And as long as you're committed to it, as long as you're doing what you're good at, intellectually, it's easy almost to understand, but it doesn't help on the emotional level. Like, how do you feel does not change, even if you understand that you're in the right place doing the right thing.
Tell me how did the first, the second, and the third months of war changed your perspective on what is happening in Ukraine? I know it's day number 100 right now, but let's start with month second and third.
If I were to give each month one sentence, the first month is despair and a sense of loss, and the second month, a conviction that Ukraine will win and there's no other outcome that's possible. And in the third month, this kind of reassurance. Yes, the West is coming together. Yes, Ukraine is showing its strengths. Yes, eventually Putin will fall. But the third month is also a feeling that it's too much still, like Mariupol, and this lack of understanding how long it's going to take and how many lives will take for this war to end, right? And knowing that the victory is inevitable, Ukraine will have it, and on the other hand, dreading why does it have to go on? Why can it not stop? Why can Russian people not recognize what they're doing, not deal with their I don't know how to refer to that person in Moscow or wherever he's hiding in the bunker.
And I couldn't imagine in the beginning of the war that there would be a day number 100. So today, many of the Ukrainians, that's what I see from the Facebook and the news. Given this summary of what it is for them, like this 100 days for them, you almost got this 100 days. What are your expectations of how the next 100 days will evolve?
I can say what my hope is that the weapons that were promised will finally make it to Ukraine. I have 100% confidence in what the Ukrainian military can do, and a lot less confidence in ability of the free world to stay focused, to stay committed. It's I find it so frustrating when promises are made, and then rhetorically people will say all the right things, but there's a disconnect, saying and doing gap. So for me, when you see the $30 billion package being approved in the U.S. and the really serious military equipment being authorized, then how soon can it get to the front lines? That will make a big difference. I'm no military expert, but to me it seems like that would matter a great deal. And Ukrainian military has the morale, has the resolve, has the Ukrainians are fighting for their country. What the Russians are fighting for, it's not even clear.
That's a hope that I could relate to as well. That's a hope that I could relate to as well. You mentioned that you're seeing Ukrainians as, and also our warriors as brave fighters and brave warriors. What else have you maybe explored about Ukrainians that you haven't known or haven't felt before?
I think one huge difference that you notice, like I've lived outside of Ukraine for 24 years, and the first, I can think of like maybe the first 23, I had to explain that Ukraine and Russia are two different countries. Let's not get them confused. And now the world finally sees that difference as well as I see it. Whether people travel to Russia or Ukraine, there is clear understanding of good and evil. There's clarity, there's political hedging. There are all kinds of complex conversation at the very top. But if you look at just average Westerner, quote unquote, there's a lot more appreciation for what Ukraine is and what it stands for.
Let's delve into this for a moment. Like you're saying, there's a lot more appreciation right now, and then I could kind of make a hypothesis that there was way less before, and that's what you said. For 24 years, we've been trying to explain what is the difference between Russia and Ukraine. So these are not the same people, not the same country, and I'm curious. You see this evolution of understanding of what Ukraine is for Europeans, let's say. But tell us more about how it was before. How the people that you spoke to in this 24 years, how they saw Ukraine before in Russia, and what exactly is changing right now.
When I lived in the U.S., for me it was very stark. Is this disconnect? In Russia, there was this obsession with the U.S., and in Washington, no one actually spoke about Russia at all. It just was not in anyone's list of priorities or consideration. And I'm talking about mid 2000s, from 2005 till 2011. I lived there, and it was not on anyone's radar. It was irrelevant. The country, just one country out there of a little relevance, whereas the Russian story was just so obsessed with how it's perceived and whether it's great or what its mission. And in the West, it just did not. It was nuisance. Things have changed, and Putin wanted attention. He didn't get it in a way that's just creating chaos and destruction. But in the sense, Ukraine was in a similar bucket. It was kind of a country out there that the West preferred not to think about. What's maybe a slightly different angle to bring in is Europeans have not fought for their values in a long time. Like an average Dutch person doesn't have to defend the Dutch way of life or what the Dutch society, the tolerance, democracy, rule of law. No one has to fight for it anymore, and they can relate to what's going on in Ukraine, how people are, whether or not they fully comprehend the geopolitics, but they see that the folks are willing to give their life for what they believe in, and that is huge, inspires a lot of admiration and respect. And because it's not a recent memory for most people where this kind of high existential questions were raised, and then people were willing to sacrifice for what they believed in.
I think for Dutch it was 1940 when Hitler attacked and the Netherlands and the Belgium get into France on the way. Yes, it's been pretty long, so it's hard to relate. I agree on that. And when you share when you speak to Europeans today, that's very curious in that as well. So you're seeing this change. Let's call it the average regular European that you speak to has more admiration to Ukraine, has more admiration to Ukrainian values or bravery or other values, and also the sense that you mentioned that of you fight for your freedom. And what else are they saying is inspiring them, or not inspiring, but they are curious about or interested about what is happening with Ukrainians right now?
Just to give you another anecdote, at booking, speaking to colleagues, when the war began, when Putin or the big scale invasion started in February 24th, I think people knew at the very second that this mattered for Europe. It was not some distant occurrence in distant lands that could be ignored, which is, I also give it as an example when I traveled to Kiev way before what's happening now, saying we expect folks in Vienna or Berlin or Amsterdam to care about Donbass, or like we want them to know that the fight is ongoing. And then if I ask anybody in Kiev, how much are you following conflict in Yemen? People are dying, bombs are flying, and we don't find it relevant because it's just not in our kind of universe of concerns, right? And then it's easy to blame Europeans for ignoring what should have mattered. On the other hand, it's human nature until it's directly relatable to you, or until you see that link. Your desire is to push it away, to kind of move it from an important issue to some other issue that you are vaguely aware of, but you can't care for all of it. And so it's that's what was happening when the war started in 2014 until the big full-scale invasion. But on February 24th and days after, I think there's a huge wake-up call among folks who follow news. They immediately knew that this was absolutely, fundamentally different. It was a very, truly different occurrence from anything that Europe had seen since World War II.
And if you could tell us and our viewers and listeners on how Dutch media was covering the war, has been covering the war. It's been 100 days. So I suspect, and that's what I saw at least in Cyprus and Poland and in Austria, that the first months was super actively broadcasted. They've sent journalists and everything. So just curious how Dutch media have reacted and is reacting now.
This is where I have to kind of disclose my ignorance, because I don't speak Dutch. I lived here for 7 years, and it's my sixth country of residence. As an American, I already acquired new culture, and I do not see myself becoming Dutch. But I do follow, and I don't watch TV, actually, to be frank. I follow news. BBC is my main news source, and I listen to their daily podcast, actually, rather than watch TV. And what I can say is, remarkably, BBC, every single day, they dedicate anywhere between half of their time to a quarter to Ukraine. And that has not lit up. There's, the headline could be a different story, but at least even in the third months, 1 or 2 or 3 headlines for a newscast would be Ukraine. And even the Jubilee of the Queen Elizabeth is a big story in the UK. Mm-hmm. We, of course, dedicate a lot of time to, but even in that episode, there would be coverage of Ukraine and highlighting why it matters. And I would say that the informed public pays attention, continues to pay attention, and that has not changed.
People you speak to in Amsterdam and in the Netherlands, you work with Booking.com, which is a global platform. So you probably speak with tons of expats, and also what you do, you consult and help on strategic policies and strategic communications as well. So you help shape the narratives, and you speak to people who are aware what is a narrative in a way. So I'm curious, like how people are reacting and what are they feeling and thinking right now about the war, and was they thinking in the process of a change in this last 100 days?
A lot of disappointment with their governments. That's what I'm feeling.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's that the governments are not doing enough. That's at least my circle. Booking office is very international. You have folks from every country in Europe and worldwide. And if you look at let's say Netherlands or Germany, my personal assessment is the public opinion is miles ahead of government rhetoric and action. And in Germany, from the polls I've seen, 80% support energy embargo, whereas government is struggling to implement this vision. And I appreciate the fact that it's as an individual you can have certain feelings and you can demand certain things. Government has to act with responsibility, and they have to weigh different interests and so on. But folks are disappointed with how European governments are not doing enough, at least in my circle of connections here in Amsterdam.
And how can they how can they funnel this disappointment into an action, into a change of behavior or change of perspective by the governments of their home countries?
So in Amsterdam, we have a weekly protest in the main square. Every Sunday, folks come out. It's not, I wish the crowds were bigger, but same is happening around Europe. I've seen photos from Paris, Berlin, thousands and thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people come out with Ukrainian flags. And this solidarity that you see from people is genuine and it's strong. But then you end up again with this saying, doing gap, right? When you hear things being announced, it's saying, we will deliver weapons. And then there's a rally and everybody's happy, but then we will deliver weapons next fall, and those weapons will be completely different from what Ukraine is asking for. Those things get lost, and politicians know how to do those things, how to say things loudly and claim a big kind of make lofty announcements, but not delivering is always the harder part. And when Ukraine says no, we appreciate the support, this is what we need now, it's also hard. It's like, how does the country ask for help when in fact what it's doing is offering things rather than asking, right? Ukraine is defending Europe, and then yet it finds itself in this awkward position saying, we're doing it for ourselves, of course, but we're also doing it for you. And why are we in this situation where we have to ask? I have this thought experiment for folks who would say Ukraine is why do you say it's fighting for Europe? It's fighting to defend its borders. And my answer is, would Europe be safer if Ukrainians chose not to fight? Would we all be more comfortable if Putin's goal of capturing Kiev in 3 days and decapitating the government and creating this quasi-state, like, would Europe be safer if that happened? And the answer is absolutely clear, no. Like, redrawing borders, the war of conquest is crazy dangerous, and people have to understand how dangerous this is. If it becomes a norm that you can attack your neighbor and that brings the benefit. You can succeed. Like if that becomes a new norm, like if other folks, people with difference, suddenly realize, oh, I can do it without penalty, and Russia's done it, so now it's doable. That means that all of those good things that Europe enjoys, the safety, prosperity, out the window. Like every country will have to arm to the teeth. The defense budgets go from 0.3% or whatever, this irrelevant figures. Suddenly everybody has to do, like, worry about defense. So in a sense, Ukraine is fighting for European security a lot more than Europe is willing to recognize. It's easy for us to say that we have enough voice to say it, but we need the political leaders in Europe to put it clearly. Ukrainians are dying for us here in Amsterdam and in Berlin, and they're defending all of us in Europe, and that's why we shouldn't be waiting to be asked.
This is a big gap about what we think we're doing and, as you mentioned, what we see, how Europe perceives it. It's a very interesting observation, and how to get this gap shorter. It's a very good question. And also, you mentioned that we're good at communicating what we're doing, and this is one of the things that I want to talk to you specifically. You're very good at strategic communications, and I was wondering if you could assess how we as a country, and when I say we, I mean how the president, the government, and also specific maybe political parties and maybe NGOs and other bodies are communicating what is happening. And yeah, so I think the assessment would be great.
From everything I've read, it's widely acknowledged that Ukraine decisively won the information war. The West has been so used to fearing Putin, fearing the Russian propaganda. And it's big part of this Ukrainian victory is also the West waking up and shutting down channels like RT, and a lot of what happened in Washington was this new approach to leaking intelligence, kind of putting us out there and thwarting Putin's narrative before it could take hold. And it's, I think, Ukraine has been given this microphone to tell its story, and it used it really well. It's amazing, because this opportunity could be squandered. Like if for a moment the world wants to hear from you, and you don't know what to say, or you don't know how to say it, or if you're not convincing, then the moment is lost, and you can't regain it. But I think Ukraine has been phenomenally successful, and maybe it's a twofold, it's I think for folks in Europe to see somebody who showed courage, to see somebody, an inspiring figure like Zelensky has become, and then suddenly it's this desire to have heroes to look up to, somebody, and to lionize a war president. So he lived up to that expectation, and the world is fascinated with him. That's one part of it, and the other part is Ukraine has the truth. That I think that's also important. For a long time, Ukraine had the truth, but they had troubles breaking in, because Russia would spend, for one unit of Ukrainian truth, there'll be 1,000 units of Russian lies backed up by endless cash and, dark money sprinkled around on PR efforts and across UK PR firms. And with that much kind of, what we call it, smear campaigns to take the narrative and create another 100 to say none of them are true, so don't believe any of it. You can never know the answer. And so Ukrainian message was drowning. But now, because Ukraine has the truth and Russian lies were exposed, then those messages are landing, and the fact that Europe has finally shut down this sewage pipe of Russian propaganda, that also helped.
That helps a lot. And then in this six package of sanctions, they've shot three Russian TV channels around Europe, which is great. TV Center, RTR Planet, and something which were, I think, in every hotel room, and not only there, and also on those, I forgot how you call those antennas, which are, well,
Yeah,
anyway.
Dish. Yeah.
Dish, yeah. Thanks a lot for that. So coming back to the how we narrate what we have right now, and it's great that you mentioned that from 2014 we didn't have we had the truth, but the one unit of truth, which is a great metaphor from you, was covered by thousands and more of units of non-truth by Russia. But from a good side, it's clear. But I also want to take a look on not a brighter side of like how we doing, how Ukraine is doing, and I wanted to see your perspective on this. So we're doing great communication on our truth, on how the war is, on what Russia is actually doing. Is there something that is missing and that you feel that we're missing right now?
That's yeah, that's I think learning to appreciate the perspectives of others, because when Ukraine speaks to the Westerners, it's also important to see the context in which they're perceiving those messages, to make them relatable. And again, I think Ukraine has been successful, but you cannot just have one or two channels, right? You have Zelensky getting a lot of attention. You have Minister of Foreign Affairs Kuleba speaking regularly, also, eloquently explaining where Ukraine stands. There's some journalists who are doing really well. There's Kyiv Independent has become a strong channel in English language. But to really break through, you need I don't know what Ukraine is doing to communicate in Dutch language or in French or in Italian. Like to be able to do all of this, you also need resources, expertise, and commitment. And if I were Ukrainian government and I had resources, I would be allocating them to the military effort. So it's again, it's like the grassroots effort pays off, but how can you structure it? How do you, as a country, how do you take this opportunity when the world wants to hear something from Ukraine? And can we give more? Can we comment more frequently across not just CNN, BBC, Reuters, and then whatever trickles down, but through other channels? Do we have competent ambassadors in every European capital?
That's a great question.
Who are willing to engage publicly, to be out there on Twitter, on TV, on radio, and explaining what's happening.
The fact that you're asking the question wasn't whether we have good ambassadors or effective ambassadors on the spot. Probably tells me that you don't really believe that. And I'm curious whether you feel or see that this might change. Do you see that maybe there is some? And I know you talk to various people in diplomatic circles as well. So maybe you see there's some traction.
It's hard for me to judge. The new ambassador arrived in the Netherlands, I think maybe a few weeks, and since I don't follow Dutch TV, I really can't tell. Are we visible? Are we part of the discourse? I hear Ukrainian voices on BBC, so I'm glad that they do call up Kiev, and I've actually heard a number of close friends, on my favorite podcast, and that's amazing. But it's also it's hard to criticize Ukraine for doing something wrong, right? It's a small country, doesn't have a lot of resources. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs. How do you match what say U.S. is able to do with embassies?
Right.
Of Russia, where it's deliberately allocate a ton of money and uses various channels to push its message. No, I don't know. I think we need to. Ukraine has to kind of plug into existing communications, not simply discuss amongst ourselves within Facebook, but instead look for where can you share the message to the audience in a way that will be relatable.
With that, I agree completely, and I'm trying to think of, like, if we have that limited resources, Kuleba and some of his team are still doing an amazing job, shaping the narrative of what is Ukraine and how it's perceived, and not only European Union but worldwide. And I do respect that. What I've also seen is that, let's say, in Australia, there's a new ambassador, Vasyl Miroshnichenko. Yeah, and we're going to talk to him soon. So this is a little spoiler. And so what he is showing and the way how he's communicating on not only on the social media but also how he's capitalizing on Twitter and everything, I think that's the way I want to see my ambassador working in the other country right now.
Exactly. No, he's setting a great example. Sasha Sherba was in Austria, was phenomenal in his way of putting out publicly Ukraine's positions. Because as an ambassador, you have this dual role, right? On one, you're a public face, and you're a back channel for kind of confidential information exchange, and that's often, the second part, like this liaison between governments, is everybody understands ambassadors have to do, but now more than ever, this public face and effective communicator role is critical.
What I wanted to also dwell on is this. So you live in Amsterdam, and we just met a Brit who is a truck driver, but he lives in Amsterdam because he works for a cargo company that transfers stuff around the world, either by trucks or on cargo ships. And this company has offices in Moscow and in St. Petersburg or somewhere else, but not only there, in Singapore and whatever. So since the war started, they had to close the offices in Russia, and also they had to cut half of their stuff because too connected to Russia. And that's basically the question, which starts now. Do you see or do you hear how Dutch businesses are struggling now? Because of what Russians did of the invasion, they're struggling to lose business in Russia, and I'm curious how they react. What do you hear about that, and what do you feel about that?
It's a tricky one for me to answer, but with Booking, the business in Russia was shut down, I think, the second week or just very quickly. It was not an easy decision. It was an important source of revenue for the company. There were many employees. The safety of employees was a question. But I think if you consider kind of top level decision making, the choice is very limited. Either you do the right thing and save your reputation, or you first ruin your reputation and then you still have to do the right thing later on, because it just no one's going to stand for it. Your customers, your employees. It's just not worth it. So whoever was hesitating paid double price. But from an average Dutch person, one thing that had happened is Netherlands imports some of the Russian gas and refused to pay in rubles. So now Moscow announced that they will stop supplying.
Have they? Have they stopped?
I have not followed exactly how it went, but it was on the day, I don't know, last week, middle of the week, they said, starting the day after, no more gas for you. There was the statement. But it's, as with all the other things, what's been said and what actually happens may or may not connect. But what I think people will feel it, right? And My gas bill will double next year, and I already pay. I think I'm like 200 or 300 euros every month for utilities, year round, right? So basically, in the winter months, it's probably 500 or 600 euros of just energy bill, and it's spread out over the year. And now that's going to increase. So people will feel the cost of what Putin is doing, but I don't think anyone's blaming the decisions of their management, or like, I think because of clarity of who is right and who is wrong. My impression is sort of understanding why the sacrifices have to be no other way.
I want to add something here. So in Austria, we met people who were saying our gas bills have doubled already, which we have to double check, maybe triple check. And they would say, listen, you should stop the war. Our bills have doubled. Some would say tripled, quadrupled, or whatever. You should stop the war. It's not good. It's not really, no one wins out of it. We don't win as well. Please don't fight. You don't have to die. Just stop the war, make a peace deal, and also we're gonna have a good gas bill. So that's where I started this narrative on which part of Austria do you want to consider giving first, let's say, or which part of if Germans talk to us, so we do this little manipulation with, like, do you think Bavaria is a good land that you want to get to Putin? So these things are happening, and how do you react when some of Dutch people or friends that you talk to are having this narrative?
Yeah, it's. I think for me the best, or the clearest answer is just plain logic. To say Putin went into Georgia, then the West looked the other way. Some sanctions, some condemnation. So this land was lost in limbo. So now settlement, right? So okay, that stopped him, right? He went to Crimea, captured Crimea. Somehow we pretend that this got settled, and of course he stopped. This is it, the last time. Then he goes into Donbass. The Russian troops, pretending they're not there, occupying Ukrainian land, endless fighting. Okay, let's settle it. Let's sue for peace. Why would anybody make an argument that settling on any terms, giving any land, Bavaria or Kherson, why would that bring things to an end? There's no logic in this argument, because if we look back, we consider the facts. We don't consider Putin's intentions. Let's not worry about what he thinks, what he wants or doesn't want. We just recount the facts, what happens, sequencing. And then it is absolutely clear that whatever Ukraine does, if it settles now, it all comes back, either right away or in a few years, under Putin or under anybody else, none of it ends. It's a wrong idea to claim that settling this is somehow saving lives and somehow bringing it to an end. No, that answer is a definitive no. Bringing it to an end is up to Putin. Pull all the troops out, leave Crimea, build a normal country. It's up to Putin to end the war. It's not up to Ukraine to settle, because it leads to no outcome. It does not end anything.
You mean that short term and mid term and even long term, I guess?
Indefinite. It simply means
because it's existential.
It's because that's what happens every single time. If Putin gets what he comes for, he comes back. It just happens every single time. There's the track record is 100%. There has not been a sudden realization, now I got what I wanted, I'm done. Like, he got what he wanted in Georgia. Was he done? No, he came for Crimea. it's simply one end. If say Ukraine surrounded today, all of Ukraine, now Russia, give it 10 years, Poland, Baltic states, it's just, it's Timothy Snyder puts it really well. It's Russia is suffering this imperial syndrome. There is no essence to the country. It exists, politics exists through conquest, through explaining why the country, why all those distant regions have to report to Moscow is because it's great Russia, and what makes Russia great is this conquest, endless acquisition, endless conflict, and until there is actual reckoning, and until Russia loses this war, changes its government, looks in the mirror the way Germany did after World War II, disowns or condemns its own wrongs, right? Now there's been rehabilitation of Stalin in Russia. Like if people don't realize that Stalin killed more people than Hitler, and those things are not in the collective memory, and instead of like recognizing all the big mistakes that the Russian state has made and owning up to it and saying never again, the opposite is happening. Stalin being brought back, and then maybe he wasn't that terrible. The Moscow narrative is he's good and bad things, right? And it's like Germany is not looking for good and bad in Hitler, and neither should Russia. It's and until there is a real serious reckoning, and or else none of it ever ends. And so this argument that if Ukraine somehow settles it somehow makes things better for Europe, no. The answer is 100% no.
Thank you so much for such an emotional, in a way, breakdown of your thoughts and what you think about it. And I personally completely agree with the way you see it. And thanks. I'll take it into how I talk to foreigners, well, to locals here, because I feel as a foreigner. I wanted to ask a few more things. So Ukrainians in Europe, those who were there before the war and those who came there as either temporary relocated or refugees already, because they have nowhere to come back. And I was curious how Dutch people, and because you live in the Netherlands, are welcoming Ukrainians. What do you see? Does something really strikes you? Anything in particular? Tell us stories.
There is, I think that the Netherlands has, it's a very efficient country. Things work in this country. And from early days when the refugees started to arrive in Europe, there was a program, there's a support network, there's a hotel for newly arriving refugees. There are families that are willing to take folks arriving from Ukraine. In schools, I think there now, if families with children arrived, and the Dutch schools will take those kids. They try to find Ukrainian teachers, and it's in its own way, it's very kind of pragmatic. I think that's also describes the Netherlands. It's a country that's has the highest level of tolerance of any other nation, and it's also hyper pragmatic and very direct. So if there is a problem, the Dutch just organize themselves to solve it. There is a Ukrainian diaspora community and the newly arriving refugees, and there's the Dutch. In Amsterdam, it's also a very international city, so English is, you hear it as frequently as you hear Dutch. But I think, yeah, it's not seen as like a big thing, right? It's like, oh, there's so many refugees and it's a crisis, or there's so many refugees and we're doing such an amazing job, and we're amazing people. It's almost neither of those extremes. It's just everybody goes on with their lives, and everybody's just doing the best to accommodate refugees and provide services.
And I can recall my experience in Cyprus, where there were 4,000 Ukrainians before the war, if I'm not mistaken, and since the war started, 30 more thousand came in, maybe 40 already. And of course, Cyprus is a country which is widely populated with Russians or with Soviets by that time, and which are, in my opinion, very, very brainwashed on that Russian TV that was there all the time. And we had clashes, of course, not like physical yet, but emotional clashes. Those swastika propaganda car, I forgot how you call that. Like they had 20 cars and they were moving around the city with swastikas, this Z and V things. And I was curious, and of course, Ukrainians, they were shouting on them with flags and everything. So that heated up in a way. And I was curious whether you could see that in Netherlands as well. Maybe the Russian community that is there and the Ukrainian one that is getting larger are not getting along well or getting along well. And what is the role of the Dutch government or the local governments and the Dutch people themselves into making that somehow work?
Yeah, I've not seen a single Z or a Russian flag anywhere. I on my bike ride to the office, I passed by some kind of commercial attaché, something with a Russian flag. I always wave, the finger that they deserve to their camera, but there's never been any people there. There's occasional protests in front of that building. You see people with Ukrainian flags of buildings. Common, say, almost on any street, if you walk for 5 minutes, you will definitely spot at least one Ukrainian flag. But I've not. It's one-sided, and there's no, Russians with their views and opposing Ukraine, supporting Putin. In Amsterdam, I've not seen one.
And
I don't know if it's true. Actually.
Understood. And personally, Andrew, when you hear Russian accent, like there's like Russian Ukrainian, Russian Belarusian, Russian, and when you hear Russian accent, do you have any triggers? Like, how do you feel? Does it make you feel awkward, angry, or else?
Yeah, actually, from 2014, things have changed for me personally. I remember when I was a newly minted immigrant in '98, moving to the US. If I hear Russian language, I would like smile, walk over to people, say, "Oh, you also speak Russian." But it's like, if you think of 1998, different era. And I grew up in Eastern Ukraine. I grew up in Donbass, and as obvious it always was for people in the Western Ukraine that Russia never had good intentions towards Ukraine. The opposite was obvious to me growing up. I was convinced that Russia is this benevolent neighbor. We have common aspirations, and definitely nobody wishes the other party ill, right? So I did not, it just, in my universe, there was no such a thing as Russia being an enemy. But from 2014, from Georgia, 2008, my father grew up in Georgia, so it was also a conflict quite relatable. Like, it was clear to me that Putin, like, I did follow politics. It was, what he was doing was apparent that none of it was good. But then after 2014, if you hear anybody speaking Russian, you kind of look away and walk away. And now, I just I struggle. I almost kind of feel guilty for speaking this language or knowing it. And some Russian folks that I know, and I've stopped using Russian. I go with English.
And Ukrainian.
Ukrainian, if I have to write something in response, I do that. Yeah.
I relate to your feelings when I hear Russian accent right now. I'm triggered from inside. I cannot explain that. The body does it itself, and I become agitated and angry at the same time. So I just, as you said, walk away in order not to like not to engage myself more and not to basically spread more anger, I guess. Right. So I think that's also a long lasting issue. And what you mentioned, and I do appreciate that you did that. That Russia and Russians, and that's one of my questions for you to you. They need to go through the remorse program, as Germans did. They need to say and feel we're sorry for what we did. We're embarrassed for what we did. We apologize, and I don't see any other way of Ukrainians forgiving Russians. And so here's the question: whether do you see it's only Putin's war or it's Russia's war?
It's definitely not just Putin. It's Russia. Every single Russian bears responsibility for their government. When I traveled to Ukraine and Yanukovych was president, and people were so upset, saying, "How in the world do we have this idiot running the country? Like he's so corrupt, he's so bad." And an American response is, "People get the government they deserve." And then, as an American citizen, I could not have been more embarrassed by Trump. Like, and you then look in the mirror and say, "You get the government you deserve. And that's your president. Like I've not voted for him. Doesn't matter. He's the president that this country chose, and it's terrible." But no one owns Trump more than Americans own Trump, and same with Russia. And this thing that I also did not appreciate until very late in my life, that the imperial thinking. Growing up Russian speaking in Ukraine, I didn't have to worry about empire. I kind of, Soviet style, believed in world peace and all nations brotherly and all the rest of it. But somebody who lives in Moscow, the imperial mindset is ingrained. It's not. It's subtle. It's this patronizing, looking down on countries around Russia, and even if intellectually they can appreciate the right and wrong and so on, but the imperial mindset is kind of at the core. It's the DNA, and the reason it's that way, it's because Russia is the only empire that hasn't collapsed. Like India is not England, right? It's two different countries, but a while back it was one country. It was one British Empire where all of those lands were somehow connected and were one thing, even though they never really were, right? So in the same way, Tatarstan and Moscovia are not the same thing, but yet they're stuck together because this land empire has not collapsed. And it's this paradox, right? It's because it's somehow the world accepted to be a country, but it really isn't. It's like British Empire was not a country. England is a country. UK is a conglomeration of a few countries, but British Empire was not a country. Same with Russian Empire. Today's Russia is this land empire that has not gone through this thing. Saying, take Switzerland. I lived in Switzerland for 3 years. They know they're Swiss and they share certain things, but they are the Confederacy, the way it's organized, is hyper independent. Every canton goes its own way. They share security, and that's where it ends. If Russia chose that post 91, saying we will create a real confederation, everybody's going to be as independent as they wish. Tatarstan could have their president, their flag, and their whole entire country. We might share security, but there'll be no vertical of power. There's going to be no center. There's no bowing to the Tsar. But because that has not happened, this uncollapsed empire persists, and it's stuck. Like Russians are victims of their own thinking, of their own inability to reform, to recognize what they are. And And so it has to come. Like today on Twitter, I saw Russia is a prison of nations, and it points to all kinds of places. It says it's not Russia. There is some identity, a Muscovy identity around Moscow, and that could be its own country. But there has either exist as a true confederation, or it has to move forward and kind of accept the rest of empires had to accept.
I just imagine the Tatarstan being a canton, let's say in Russian Confederation. Just imagine it. And, it's hard to believe, honestly saying, but it's a good visual thinking in a way that keeps me going and gives a little bit of hope in a way. So yeah, in the end, few things. What exactly would you want to do for the if the war is the next 100 days? What exactly would you want to do the next 100 days to help Ukraine? That's A. So you're not feeling guilty, but you're doing it also because you want to do it. And what do you think Ukrainians who are abroad can do for Ukraine in the next period of war and after war?
I think speak the truth, be engaged politically, come to protests, talk to people, everybody who is interested, spend time, connect, share what you know. I think I do spend quite a bit of time on Twitter, the platform that I personally don't like, but I know that that's where, like for me, it's not a joyful experience, but I do spend time there to share Ukrainian narrative to make sure I amplify the messages or produce my own messages. I think we all, if we speak a local language somewhere in Europe, we have to take on that responsibility to be a kind of cultural ambassador. Take what Ukraine has to say, adjust it to local context, make it relatable, and share it. That's what we can do.
And that's what we have to do, and we will do. Thank you, Andrew Chachoyan from Amsterdam, a birthday man, actually, and a great human being. Thank you so much for sharing your narrative and your story and your perspective. We're going to continue doing this show with foreigners who are not Ukrainians or Ukrainians who are foreigners in a way, and sharing perspective of the world on the war that is happening and trying to understand and to comprehend this war. Thank you, Andrew. My name is Andres Suslenko, and we'll talk soon.